Okay, ladies and gentlemen, up until now, we have been talking about reactions that look something like this. One way or another, either acid or base, that will give you this. And the formal name for this molecule would be an aldol. Yay, that's awesome. Now, the thing about the aldol is there is another step beyond the aldol that typically happens, and you don't have a whole lot of choice in it. If you have an aldol formation, you're going to go ahead and push it all the way through to the aldol condensation. Now, condensation is a really old chemistry jargon word, and it was called literally because some molecule would bead or condense as a drop in the flask. So you could see a condensation reaction was going on with this is your stirring medium in a round bottom flask, and you would start to see these droplets condensing. Literally, it's just what it says on the tin, condensing on the inside of the flask. So, aldol condensations, they're actually virtually impossible to do. It's virtually impossible to stop at an aldol reaction. 99% of them almost always go straight to the condensation product. So let's go with acetophenone. We're going to use our acid-mediated pathway here. And we're going to get this as our aldol product. Sort of like when you had acid, you had an aldehyde or a ketone, an acid, and an alcohol. You could never stop at the hemiacetal. You would always press on to the full acetal. You couldn't pull the brakes there. Well, this is the aldol formation product, except I can't spell formation. Formation product, and that is well and good. The aldol condensation would involve adding in more acid and losing water, so it's dehydrating, and this would be your product. You would be generating an alkene as your product here. Now, as for a mechanism, this shouldn't be very hard to figure out. I will tell you that in the acid pathway, it is an E1 type of mechanism, meaning the elimination goes something like this. We start here. We get this as our aldol. We protonate it. Here's what we get. I'm going to start abbreviating these aromatic rings as phi, because they really don't have a huge role on what's going on. This serves as a nice leaving group for two reasons. One, it's a tertiary cation that forms, and 2, it is also resonance through this ring. So what we form here is this. This cation. And if no other nucleophile is wandering around getting into mischief, we will in fact eliminate, and you will make this. Now, this ketone alkene has a very specific name to it. It is an alpha beta unsaturated carbonyl. Now, we're going to get into why that's important in a few minutes. But for now, this is the acid pathway of generating this aldol condensation product, this alpha-beta unsaturated carbonyl. Why don't we go ahead and take a look at the base pathway that does that? Because this one is probably going to piss you off. And I'm going to go back to, let's use acetophenone again, just because I have a thing for 6-membered rings. So let's say we use hydroxide as our base here. We're using hydroxide as our base. So what we generate is this as our aldol product. Now, you might be asking yourself, without any further acid in our system here, are we done? Do we actually stop at the aldol product? And the answer to that, children, is no. Now's the time in this lecture where you are going to feel massively betrayed, like you felt when your parents told you there wasn't a Santa, or you felt when your parents told you there wasn't an Easter bunny, or a tooth fairy, or God either. That all those things were fictional. You probably felt a little betrayed, like you didn't understand the universe at all. You might feel that way right about now when you see this happen. The deprotonation of this system to give you this. I'm sorry, I'm running into my arrow there a little bit. Plus hydroxide anion. I know, I spent the better part of how many semesters telling you hydroxide is a crappy leaving group, it can't happen. Well, it can happen, and I'm going to explain why in the next video. I got one other thing I want to show you here. One other way of you making an alpha, beta, unsaturated carbonyl. And it's like this. You might be asking yourself why I'm using acetophenone or a derivative of acetophenone in almost all of my examples here. And the answer to that question of why I'm staying with these phenyl ketones is there's only one side where you have acidic protons to work with. You don't have two sides like you do in other cases. So let's say we react this with a little bit of acid and bromine, and because it's the acid pathway, we stop here. We stop with the monobromination. Remember, My phone rang there and I forget what I was saying, so let's try this again. Because this is the acid pathway, monobromination will rule the day. If we use the base pathway, you would fill up all available protons on that carbon. But because we're using acid, there's monobromination there. So now the question you're probably asking yourself is, so what? What can I do with this? Well, you use a little bit of base, and sometimes that base can just be water. Sometimes it might be a carbonate at worst. But what you get is this. That alpha-beta unsaturated carbonyl. Why is that important? Why is that crucial? And what effect will that have on your life? Tune in next time, ladies and gentlemen. Until then, I'm Kurt Weigel, and you're not.